Welcome to the Heal Loudly Movement blog and podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Ryan Kotler. Today's episode is about post-separation abuse, when the relationship ends but the control doesn't. Post-separation abuse is a documented and escalating form of coercive control that begins or intensifies after a survivor leaves. Research consistently shows that separation is the most dangerous period in an abusive relationship. Studies indicate that 60 to 75% of domestic violence-related homicides occur during or after separation, not during the relationship itself. Survivors are often targeted through legal systems, social network, finances, employment, and reputation rather than direct physical proximity. The abuse doesn't end because the relationship ends, it adapts. This is one of the most misunderstood realities of abuse. The common assumption is that leaving equals safety, that distance equals freedom, and that the end of a relationship marks the end of harm. For many survivors, the opposite is true. Separation removes access, but it also removes restraint. What follows is often an escalation rather than a resolution, not driven by emotion alone, but by the abuser's need to reassert control after losing it. Data from domestic violence and family court research shows that abusers who lose direct access frequently shift to post-separation tactics such as litigation abuse, false allegation, smear campaigns, stalking, and economic sabotage. Survivors involved in family or civil court are significantly more likely to face repeat filings, retaliatory motions, and misuse of protective systems. One multi-jurisdictional study found that over 50% of survivors experienced legal harassment following separation, with many reporting financial devastation and long-term psychological harm as a result. This phase of the abuse often looks quieter on the surface. There may be no physical proximity and no visible bruises. Instead, the harm moves into systems, courts, employers, housing, institutions, social circles. The abuse shifts from private to procedural, from intimate to systematic, from overt to plausibly deniable. And because it wears the appearance of legitimacy, it is often missed or minimized by the very structures meant to protect survivors. See, post-separation abuse is frequently mischaracterized as a high conflict or mutual disputes, despite clear evidence of one side, patterning, escalation, and intent. This mislabeling allows abuse to continue unchecked while survivors are re-traumatized by systems meant to protect them. And when abuse is reframed as conflict, power imbalance disappears from the conversation. Pattern is replaced with isolated incidents, intent is ignored, and accountability dissolves. Naming post-separation abuse accurately is critical. When patterns are recognized, documented, and understood, the narrative shifts from victim blaming to accountability. This is the foundation of the Heal Loudly movement. Post-separation abuse is not conflict. It is controlled by other means. The Heal Loudly movement uses a post-separation abuse checklist to identify patterns that begin or escalate after separation. These behaviors are not misunderstandings. They are deliberate strategies designed to exhaust, stabilize, intimidate, and to punish. These patterns include excessive or frivolous legal filings intended to exhaust time, money, and emotional capacity. Repeated motion petitions or complaints filed after dismissal, lack of evidence or default, weaponizing restraining orders, custody filings, welfare checks, or court procedures, and filing across multiple jurisdictions to create confusion, fear, and financial strain. Manipulating service notice timing or venue to force last-minute appearances. They also include false allegations presented as facts to courts, to employers, landlords, or institutions. The smear campaigns portraying the survivor as dangerous, unstable, abusive, or criminal. Defamation framed as concern, protection, and public warning. Coordinated attacks by friends, family, and third parties are acting on behalf of the abuser. Post-separation abuse often includes stalking behaviors following separation, whether online, offline, or through third parties. The monitoring of social media, work, housing, travel, and relationships, creating fake accounts to harass, intimidate, provoke, and surveil. Financial abuse frequently escalates after separation, sabotaging employment, income, and benefits, interfering with housing, utilities, transportation, or basic stability, and forcing repeated legal costs to maintain leverage and control. See, there's often a deliberate rewriting of history and denial of documented evidence, claims of victimhood paired with ongoing aggressive actions, a refusal to disengage despite no contact orders, boundaries, or court rulings. Provocation becomes strategic. Emotional reactions are baited, then weaponized through screenshots, recordings, or selective presentation. Communication is initiated only to be selectively edited or misrepresented later. Gaslighting is reframed as reconciliation, accountability, or closure. A defining feature is escalation when previous tactics fails. Abuse increases after boundaries are set and no contact is initiated. Actions focus on punishment, dominance, and control rather than resolution. And what matters the most is the pattern over time. Repetition, intent, behavior that only stops when external consequences are imposed. Harm that exists solely because the relationship has ended. When multiple items apply, this indicates post-separation abuse. It's not mutual conflict, it's not a misunderstanding, and it's not a personality clash. Post-separation abuse is a phase of coercive control that emerges or intensifies after the survivor leaves. It is not some misunderstanding, it's not mutual conflict. It's a relationship for loss of access and loss of control. And when the relationship ends, the abuse does not, it just adapts. And this is where many survivors are harmed a second time, not by just the abuser, but by the systems that misunderstand what they're seeing. Institutions are often designed to respond to single incidents, not long-term patterns. They see filings, not sequences, allegation, not escalation, responses, not retaliation. Courts and institutions do not automatically see continuality, escalation, or intent unless it is documented over time and presented in a way that the system can recognize. This places an unfair burden on survivors to translate lived experience into procedural language, often while under extreme stress and trauma. Healing loudly does not mean speaking constantly. It doesn't mean reacting publicly to every provocation. It doesn't mean explaining yourself to people who are not positioned to protect you. Healing loudly means refusing to internalize the lie that silence equals weakness or that restraint equals complicity. Sometimes healing loudly is strategic quiet. During post-separation abuse, the goal is not resolution, the goal is containment. The abuse continues because it is still producing leverage, attention, reaction, exhaustion, financial strain, narrative control. Removing those payoffs is how the behavior is exposed for what it is. This period requires a shift in mindset. Survivors must move from relational thinking to strategic thinking. The question is no longer how do I make them stop? The question becomes how do I reduce harm while the system catches up? Disengagement isn't avoidance, it is harm reduction. No contact where possible, minimal necessary contact where required. Factual, brief, documented. No explaining, no defending, no correcting narratives in real time. Every emotional response becomes material that can be reframed and weaponized. Calm consistency does not. Documentation becomes more important than persuasion. Memory is not enough. Systems don't rule on feelings. They rule on records, dates, language, frequency, outcomes, and patterns. Survivors who document are not dwelling, they're preserving reality. This means keeping contemporary logs, preserving metadata, saving service records, capturing verbatim statements, noting impacts on housing, income, health, and safety. And over time, the behavior tells its own story. Escalation, repetition, continuity, intent. The evidence begins to generate itself. Stability is another form of protection. Post-separation abuse often targets basic needs because destabilization increases control. Housing, employment, transportation, finances, reputation. Securing these areas isn't selfish or excessive, it's survival. Stability reduces leverage. Public narrative battles rarely help during this phase. Smear campaigns are designed to provoke defensive explanations that can later be distorted. Silence is not agreement, it's containment. And when statements are necessary, they should be neutral, procedural, and limited. Documentation speaks louder than rebuttals. And support should be intentional. Not everyone needs a full story. A small, informed circle is often safer than a broad disclosure. Isolation increases vulnerability, but overexposure increases risk. Healing loudly includes choosing who has access to your reality. Regulation is not wellness trend here. It's a safety skill. Dysregulation is what abusers rely on. Exhaustion, panic, rage, despair. A regulated survivor is harder to provoke, misrepresent, or discredit. Rest, grounding, and trauma-informed support are strategic necessities. And there's an uncomfortable truth that survivors must be allowed to hold. Sometimes you have to let it play out. And I know that's not fair. Not because it's acceptable, not because it's deserved, but because systems often require enough data to see what's actually happening. When survivors stop intervening in every moment and instead focus on consistency and documentation, the behavior escalates into visibility. The mask will slip, the pattern clarifies, and the record forms. Healing loudly isn't about volume, it's about truth over time. This phase is not about healing yet, it's about surviving with clarity. Healing comes later, when safety and stability return. Naming post-separation abuse allows survivors to stop asking why this is happening and to start asking how to limit the harm until it stops. And this isn't silence, it's strategy. Now, before we close out today, it matters to say this clearly. What you have just heard is not isolated experience. It's not an antidote. It's not rare. It's structural. And it's why this work exists beyond a single voice. If this resonates with you, if you recognize these patterns in your own life or in someone you care about, there are places where this conversation continues. Voices No More, The Legal War on Narcissistic Abuse is available now on Amazon. That book goes deeper in how coercive control survives separation and how legal systems are weaponized and how survivors are forced to fight, not just for the abuser, but a process that was never built to see pattern. It was written for survivors, advocates, and professionals who are ready to stop calling abuse conflict and start calling it what it is. There's also an active work happening beyond education. The Voiceless Justice Act petition is live on change.org. This petition exists because post-separation abuse is still largely invisible in policy, procedure, and training. Signing it is not symbolic. It's a way to demand recognition, safeguards, and accountability where silence has been normalized for way too long. And finally, if this episode helped you name something you couldn't articulate before, please help it reach others. Like this podcast, share this episode, and send it to someone who is still questioning their reality. Post-separation abuse thrives in isolation and confusion. Information disrupts that. Naming patterns disrupts that. And records disrupts that. Healing loudly is not about volume. It's about truth being heard long enough to matter. Thank you for listening. And remember, stay strong. You guys got this. You're stronger than you know.